Hi, thanks for watching this episode of the Vital Point podcast. I wanted to give you some context just so you don't get confused. This episode was originally published on Instagram, and when I published it, the podcast was called One Question Wednesday. The reason for that being that I watched this amazing video with Gary Vee where he talked about if you want to do a podcast and you're just starting off, why don't you try a 90-second podcast? And I knew I wanted to talk about transformation, about integration, about breathwork and meditation and things that were a little bit heavier than 90 seconds. But I thought, what if we just keep it to one question? And so that's what I did. So two things came out of that. One, much shorter episode. So these videos are a lot shorter than some of the more recent episodes you may have been checking out on my channel. And two, I just wanted to get them out. You know, I was just learning about podcasting. I had another podcast that I had gotten the idea for, recorded 5 or 6 episodes, and then sat on them, not really being able to put them out for almost a year, you know, worrying about the editing, worrying about the distribution and the marketing and what to do. And so the idea with One Question Wednesday was to do the exact opposite of that. From the time that I saw the video from Gary Vee to posting the first episode with Ayahuasca Car was less than 2 hours. And so, you know, 60% became the new 100%. It is a little bit messy. It's, you know, that was my idea. I didn't want to get trapped in a cycle of perfection. Didn't want to get stuck. And I was just figuring things out, which worked out great. So wanted to get those episodes off of Instagram where they've been living and onto YouTube to get into a bigger audience and have all of the podcasts be under one umbrella. So if you haven't checked out the more recent videos, we're on season 6 now. Definitely subscribe to the channel. There's a lot of content on there. And this first season is really defined by not having any equipment. Season 1 ended when I realized I really needed a microphone, and I've got a nice one now. So season 1 was recording onto my phone, a couple of episodes on Zoom, and then not having a microphone. But the content is fantastic. The guests are fantastic, and there's some really valuable content about breathwork, about ayahuasca, and psychedelic integration. And you know, I think the content stands on its own. So I'm still really proud of it. I'm proud of the guests that I've had on this podcast, and I hope that you enjoy it too. If you're interested in learning more about psychedelic integration, coaching, breathwork, how to use breathwork to support, you know, connecting to your purpose, having a more resourced and regulated nervous system for working with psychedelics, I'd love to chat with you more about that. There's information below about how you can get a hold of me for that. And if you're not part of my newsletter, definitely click the link below to join. You'll get a free guide to using breathwork for integration to start with, as in addition to, you know, staying up to date with the breathwork circles that I'm holding, workshops, information about the podcast, all kinds of amazing stuff. So hope you enjoyed this video. Just wanted to give some context. So, you know, when you're watching it and it says One Question Wednesday, you're like, wait, I thought this podcast was called The Vital Point. It is The Vital Point, and the vital point is to practice, that you have to put these things into practice. But like I said in the beginning, when this was recorded, One Question Wednesday was what I was doing. So I hope you enjoy it. Cheers.
All right, part 2.
Here we go.
We got it this time.
Let's
All
do
right,
it.
so welcome to episode 3 of One Question Wednesday, the podcast where we just only ask one question. So today our guest is the wonderful Conni Biesalski. She's a breathwork facilitator, coach, writer, blogger, and a friend of mine. We met during the neurodynamic facilitator training.
We sure
and
did.
someone that I've been following with a lot of interest, and as a mentor and peer in the breathwork space. So welcome, Connie.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Super cool.
Yeah.
Happy to be here.
So our one question this week is about trauma. And, one of the things that I've really enjoyed about the work that you've been doing post program is just working with the nervous system and working with trauma. And it's something that's super fascinating to me as well. So the question is, what kind of breathing practices or protocols would you give to somebody that comes to you that's brand new to breath work, that tells you like, hey, I have trauma in my past? And would it be different if it was somebody that was talking about like childhood trauma versus, trauma with a big T, like a car crash or sexual assault or something, very drastic?
Yeah, wonderful questions. Thank you. So I think, I mean, at first, when I work with clients, the first step is always to check out the breathing pattern, how they're breathing, mainly really looking at how they're breathing at rest. And then going from there. And at this point, it doesn't matter that much, maybe, what sort of history they have, what sort of trauma they might have experienced in their lives. And then from there, usually, though, people who have experienced any sort of trauma that's still stuck in their bodies that hasn't really been processed yet. And for me, trauma is a really sort of, it's a wide concept. Like, I think a lot of us, when we hear trauma, we usually think of like a shock trauma, like abuse, or, a massive accident, or, a death or something. So I look at trauma as something that's very multidimensional. And, yes, it can be definitely shock trauma, but then there's also developmental trauma and attachment injuries that we experience in childhood with our caregivers and then caretakers. And then we have, birth trauma, prenatal trauma when we're still in the womb, and ancestral trauma. And so there's a big variety of different ways that we can hold and store stress energies and trauma energies in our bodies, and have blocked emotions in our physiology, in our nervous system. And so and that shows in our breathing pattern. And so a lot of times when people have experienced trauma, they might have a bit of a dysfunctional breathing pattern in terms of maybe they're breathing quite fast. They have a high respiration rate, or they're breathing, with their upper chest a lot, and maybe they're breathing through their mouth a lot, or have very irregular breathing, maybe like a lot of sighing, a lot of yawning, things of that nature. Doesn't have to tick all the boxes, but it can be any of those. And then, there's a breathing test that we can do. It's called the BOLT score, body oxygen level test, or also called the control pause test. And that sort of also gives us an idea of where our clients are at in terms of their breathing. And usually people who've experienced trauma, the BOLT score, the control pause, is usually quite low. And by low, I mean below 20 seconds, or in severe cases, below 10 seconds. I've had clients below 10 seconds. Or we can also use something like heart rate variability, and measure that, and sort of get an idea of what's the state of the nervous system. And I guess, with BOLT score or the control pause, or HRV, they're very representative, not just of their breathing pattern, but their overall state of the nervous system. And that's kind of what I look at as well, is how is their nervous system? And that's where things like the polyvagal theory comes in for me. There's not just the sympathetic branch of the nervous system or the parasympathetic part of the nervous system. Yes, we have the sympathetic, but then there's kind of two branches of the parasympathetic part of the nervous system, the ventral vagal state and the dorsal vagal state. And those are very, the dorsal vagal state, more, especially people who've experienced trauma, they might, be stuck in dorsal, meaning in shutdown mode, withdrawal, maybe, they're dealing with depression and a lot of numbness in their body. So they might have quite a shallow breathing maybe going on. You might not even see that they're breathing a whole lot,
Mhm.
and so we might falsely believe that maybe, they have a healthy breathing pattern. And I had this recently too. And then a lot of other people who've experienced trauma, they might be stuck in sympathetic mode. So they're more dealing with anxiety, panic attacks, things of that nature. And so that's really important for me to look at. Where are they at on that spectrum? How is their window of tolerance in terms of their nervous system? Do they get stuck in hyper arousal a lot in sympathetic mode? Or do they get stuck in hypo-arousal a lot? Or maybe in both, depending on what happens in their lives. And so those are all sorts of factors that I look at and that I, sort of talk about with my clients or students, because that tells me a lot about how they might respond to certain breathing techniques and breathing methods. But generally, we could say that, or that's how I do it anyway with clients, is that the first step is to get people to feel safe in their body and to get them back into their body. Because a lot of times with trauma, right, we dissociate. We sort of live from the neck up a lot. We don't feel very safe in our bodies. We're not very grounded. We struggle to be in the present moment with our bodies and with our senses. And so that's kind of one of the first things that I do, is to just get people acquainted again with their body and their senses. And then from there, I take it real easy, depending on their BOLD score, depending on their trauma history. I then slowly guide them into, just to see how do they react to breath hunger, to air hunger, for example, right? Like if I tell them to, let's say, hold their breath for 5 seconds after an exhale, are they okay with that? Or do I maybe even need to decrease that to 3 seconds, Because some people who have, deal with anxiety a lot or panic attacks, their sort of, their threshold in terms of feeling air hunger is very limited. So I have to be quite careful with that. And then slowly see if I can increase the number of seconds that they can hold their breath. And depending on how they react to the breath holds, the small little breath holds, I either just stick to that for a while and have them do that as a daily practice. So small little breath holds, for 10 minutes or so, or even just 5 minutes to get them started, and then maybe do that several times a day. Especially for people who have a BOLD score of less than 10 seconds. Like, you got to be really careful to, in terms of air hunger, and be really gentle and sort of ease them in. And then, once they're above 10 or 15, it makes sense to introduce light breathing. So where you're kind of decreasing the volume of breathing, the respiratory rate, you bring that one down to, 5, 6, 7 breaths per minute, to just kind of see how comfortable they are. And I think that's one of the number one guidelines is really to just take it step by step. I think what I see a lot among breath workers is that they go too fast with people. They give them too much too soon. And I think it's important, and that's, I like working, one-on-one or in small groups. So I can, really check in with people, how was this for you? How did this feel? And really get direct feedback. And so I can adjust their home practice. And so that's, that's all about their home practice. And then if they're more stuck in dorsal, for example, so they're more in shutdown, they're dealing more with depression, that sort of stuff, sometimes they need a bit of a kick. They need to get activated a little bit more. And so sometimes it's a good idea to then give them a bit of more of an activating breath, maybe like in through the nose, out the mouth, kind of like a connected breath, or maybe even in and out the mouth, just for a few minutes, and then get them into like a nice coherence breathing, light breathing, to just kind of balance out the nervous system again. So I find that's why, in terms of the polyvagal theory, I think it's really important to look at people from that perspective and through that lens, especially when they've experienced trauma. And the other thing is with, let's say, the dynamic breath work that we also teach, you and I, and In our case, it's called neurodynamic. You can call it transformational breathwork. There's all sorts of different names for it. That's something that I would, especially people with low BOLT scores, and especially also people who I know are struggling with PTSD, who experienced a big shock trauma in their lives and are still sort of working through that, and maybe they still have flashbacks and whatnot. For those people, I'd usually have them discuss it with a therapist first or psychologist to see if breathwork is the right modality for them. Usually we want people to be already in a more balanced sort of state where they have a good support network as well. They're working with a therapist, and that there's a certain groundedness maybe already in their being before diving into like a full-on 60-minute dynamic breathwork, breathing in and out through the mouth. So just being careful in the screening process when it comes to those sorts of sessions. And I think that's basically roughly how I go about these kinds of people. And the thing is, at the end of the day, we all experience trauma in one way or another, right? Or some sort of attachment injury where we ended up with a dysregulated nervous system. And so, and some of us, we might not have had experienced trauma per se, but we still have a dysregulated nervous system and we have a unhealthy breathing pattern. And so in the end, it doesn't really matter what the story is, right? Like I look at the breathing pattern, I look at their nervous system. I take the polyvagal lens, and I might do the BOLT score or have a measure the HRV, and from there I can tell pretty well like how where the nervous system is at in the breathing, and then sort of adjust from there. So I think that's about it. Yeah.
Such a great thorough answer, and I love that. I love that you're using science. You have tools to measure the physiology of, right? There's so much in the breathwork community that's like kind of on the woo-woo side, and there's a time and a place for that, I think. But like what I hear you saying is like, hey, we have these tests, we know about the science of the nervous system, and you're able to it sounds like really take your clients on a journey from where they're at to a much more expansive state through through this lens of polyvagal and the nervous system, and keeping them safe the whole time. Like I listened to your recent podcast with Johnny Miller on one of our other classmates, and you were talking. I think the way you were describing it was kind of like almost like a ladder, right? Like going from that shutdown state into like the sympathetic state where you're a little bit more open, you're not so shut down, and then into this ventral vagal expansive safety kind of feeling. So it's great that you can take them through that in a way that's safe, so that they can experience like, whoa, okay, wow, there's so much more safety here. And for me, with my own experience of trauma, that was like the key for me was like, oh wow, I don't feel safe right now. And coming back to that place of safety where I feel so much more expansive, I can breathe so much easier. I feel comfortable sitting down and breathing for an hour, doing the more expansive breath work that we've practiced. It's such a wonderful feeling.
Totally. And I think also, what I like to do, and that's usually always kind of the plan that I follow when I do one-on-one coachings, or also currently in my group coaching program, is that, the first 4 or 5 sessions are all, the first 4 sessions really are all about, establishing a good foundation, a good breathing foundation. And then from there, we all have the tools to ground ourselves down again. And then from there, I then take them into a deep dive sort of dynamic breathwork session. And that to me feels really aligned, sort of. And the other thing that you just mentioned about the polyvagal theory and kind of the ladder is, when we look at someone who's stuck in dorsal, right at the bottom of the ladder, being in shutdown, depression, that sort of state, immobilized state sort of, where we really need to first get up into a sympathetic state before we can then move into a ventral state. And so I can't, if I just give them, let's say someone who struggles with shutdown, depression, if I just tell them to do coherence breathing or 4 in, 6 out, and with light breathing and diaphragmatic breathing, they get really, really, really tired and really quickly. And that's not what they might want in the mornings, especially because what they actually need is to really get going first, right? So you want to possibly give them a more activating breath first, and then maybe a little breath hold after, and then kind of level them off with a nice balancing breathing technique. So yeah, it's really about sort of kind of being able to, as a breath worker, I think to learn how to sequence a practice depending on someone's nervous system state. And so that's also why it's so hard sometimes, I mean, I do Instagram live sessions and I was doing them on Instagram every Monday for a few months, and I'm taking a break now. But it's like, on the one hand, I want to give a group of people an experience. And on the other hand, I know that there is no one size fits all solution. There is no one size fits all breathing technique that works for everybody and for all the different nervous system states and trauma histories and whatnot. And so finding that balance, right, I think is really important. And sometimes I see, some people on Instagram or YouTube just doing things, and I'm just like, I'm not sure this is the right place to guide people into these intense experiences without screening them. And so I'm definitely more I like to root my work and how I guide people in a safe container, without having, thinking I need to blow their minds or something, I'm also not a proponent very much of the Wim Hof method. I think that it's something that might feel really good for a little while, but there's physiological reasons, and also based on our nervous system and trauma history, that it might not be the right breathing technique for probably most people out there, actually, until you get to a place where you have a really good breathing foundation. And then it doesn't really matter, if you have a Bolt score of 30 plus, then knock yourself out if that's what you still need, but you probably don't, because now you have such a nice balanced nervous system that you don't need to, sort of blow your mind all the time, or blow your nervous system, or so yeah. So that's often the danger I find with people who've experienced trauma, is that they're sometimes very attracted to stuff like Wim Hof, or like, I don't know, the really intense breathwork modalities, because sometimes when we've experienced trauma and there's big parts in our bodies or small parts in our bodies that feel quite numb, we might then be attracted to modalities and practices that are quite intense, so that we can feel ourselves, right? So that we can feel alive, so that we can feel these big emotions, because maybe in other areas of our lives we struggle to do that. Or the type A overachiever personalities, who are attracted to, more intensity. And so I think that there's something we as a collective, as a breathwork teacher and coach collective, we need to be more sensitive.
Awesome. Yeah, I like what you said about like gaining different resources, for breathing, and that really resonates with me as well. Like it sounds like you're working with your clients to give them a lot of awareness of where they're at right now, and then give them different resources to work with depending on where they're at in the moment, or where they find themselves at different points during the day, or as their practice develops. You have these different breathing resources. Okay, you're feeling kind of down and stuck today, like here's what you can do to bring that up. Now you're okay, you're in your sympathetic, maybe you're feeling kind of anxious, or you want to get away from this. this is a different resource that you can use.
Totally, yeah. And I think the first step really is to reconnect our bodies, to build autonomic awareness, an awareness for these different nervous system states, and to learn that. And then from there, know, as a practitioner of breathwork, then know, okay, this is how I'm feeling right now. This is where my nervous system is at right now. This could be a good technique. And so, yeah, I think as breathworkers, as teachers, or facilitators, it's our job to equip people with that knowledge and those skills. It's really a skill that we've unlearned and that we need to relearn again. And so, because we need to, look at the breath as the remote control for our nervous system. And with that, there's so much power in using our breath. And with that comes a lot of responsibility. And I think a lot of people take that responsibility very lightly. But I think we need to take it a bit more seriously, because we can directly influence our nervous system, every time we change our breath. And so with that, we can have a big effect, and it can be on the beneficial side or on the not so beneficial side. And so understanding how the breath works, understanding how our nervous system works. And I think it's so essential for any human being, really. And I'm really passionate about studying the breath and studying the nervous system, studying our physiology, and then also sharing what I've learned with the world, because I think it's just so foundational to living a human life, sort of.
Well, thank you so much for sharing what you've learned with the world, and for doing what you're doing. It sounds like you're doing a great job. So I want to stick to our format. I feel like we could talk for a lot longer.
Yeah, we're just getting started, Jonathan.
Yeah, right? Well, we'll have to do it again.
Yeah, maybe I should interview you next time. Yeah, we should maybe just turn it around. I'd love to do that, because there's so much within you, so much wisdom and knowledge and experience that, So anyway.
Thank you. So where should people check you out if they want to learn more or they want to work with you?
Yeah, so, here on Instagram, pretty active on breathwork.alchemy, and then you can DM me at any time. I'm currently taking a little break for a few weeks or a month off of my the weekly Instagram breathwork sessions, but I'll be back. I just had my last one on Monday, but there's a whole archive full of IGTV breathwork session videos. I usually do a little intro talk, and then we breathe. It's always a bit different. And yeah, so that's kind of fun. And we're actually about to kick off the teacher training next month. So if there's any Germans around who want to dive deep for 6 months, then we might still have a spot or so available, but we're pretty booked out, actually. Other than that, yeah, just having fun, really, sharing breathwork here on Instagram, and my weekly, or not weekly, actually, it's more like a monthly newsletter by now, but yeah, I do send it out.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being a guest on One Question Wednesday. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much.
We'll definitely have to do it again.
Sweet. Yeah, no, this was fun. Thank you so much.